Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Wednesday, December 6th at 9:30 a.m. and we are continuing in the hearing in docket number 2023-154-E. This docket pertains to South Carolina Public Service Authorities, also known as Santee Cooper's 2023 Integrated Resource Plan. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. As we concluded yesterday, we had concluded with the presentation by Santee Cooper. They had rested, and we are now on interveners. And I believe Mr. Ellerby wants to be recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have had conversations with my colleagues representing the other interveners as well as the applicant, and have gotten their agreement that Central will be allowed to call its witness, Kayla Bryant, out of turn. So with that, I'd like to proceed to call him to testify virtually if the chair, if that's what the chair desires.
That'll be fine, Mr. Ellerby.
Okay.
I did ask the interveners to work together so that witnesses that had conflicts could get in and out, and if y'all agree with that, that's fine with me. Let me recognize Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Chair. I've had the pleasure of the past 2 days being on not one, but two screens, and I do not anticipate any questions today. So if it pleases the Chair, I would like to reside in the gallery for the remainder of the presentation. And this has the added benefit of being outside of the line of fire of Mr. Witt. So if that pleases the commission, I would appreciate it.
Madam Chair, I object because I've been hiding behind him.
Well, Mr. Burns, I think it may be your turn to be on the screen. And
Okay.
Mr. Spear, if you would like to do that, if you have objections, though, you're going to have to be quick and get to a microphone. So,
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair.
If you're more comfortable in the gallery, that's fine with me. Thank you. Mr. Burns?
Yes, ma'am. Just to follow up on the witness order, after this initial witness, CCBA witness Arnie Olson will go out of order, and then it'll go back to the regular order, as I understand it.
As long as y'all got it worked out so that the witnesses that have conflicts can be heard, that's fine with me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Ellerby, please proceed.
Central calls Kayla Bryant, please.
Do you need me to swear? You can? Okay. Mr. Bryant is virtual, is that correct?
Yes, I'm here.
Just a moment. We need to get you on the screen, Mr. Bryant. There we go. Mr. Bryant, I'm going to ask that you raise your right hand and the court reporter will administer the oath, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. You may put your hand down, and Mr. Ellerby, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bryant, would you state your name and by whom you're employed?
Yes, my name is Kayla Bryant, and I am employed by Central Electric Power Cooperative.
And what is your position with Central?
I'm the manager of corporate planning.
Okay. Have you caused to be prepared 10 pages of testimony that has been pre-filed in this docket?
I have.
If I asked you the questions contained in that pre-filed testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, we'd ask that Mr. Bryant's pre-filed direct testimony be copied in the record as if given orally from the stand.
And I want to just clarify, this is the corrected version.
This is the corrected version, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant's pre-filed corrected direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
And Mr. Bryant, did we attach one exhibit which is attached to your direct testimony as Exhibit A?
We did.
Okay. Madam Chair, we would ask that Exhibit A to Mr. Bryant's pre-filed corrected direct testimony be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
The exhibit accompanying Mr. Bryant's corrected direct testimony and marked as Exhibit A will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 15 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bryant, are you prepared to summarize your testimony for the commission now?
I am.
Would you do that, please?
Yes. So, good morning, Chair Belser and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and also to do it remotely. Yeah. My name is Caleb Bryant. I'm the Manager of Corporate Planning for Central Electric Power Cooperative, and I am testifying for Central in this proceeding. Central is a nonprofit electric cooperative that is owned and managed by its members. Its members are the 20 electric cooperatives that operate in South Carolina. Unlike distribution cooperatives, Central does not provide any retail service. Its function is to provide wholesale service to its members and to assist those members with planning and other operational functions as determined by its board. Central's board has 40 members consisting of 2 representatives from each of the 20-member cooperatives. I began my career with Central in 2005. I've worked in a variety of positions of increasing responsibility during my time at Central. My duties have included performing annual load forecasts for Central's 20-member cooperatives and performing other planning functions related to preparing our members to assist our members in serving their customers. As a corporate planner for Central, I perform production cost modeling to determine the cost of producing electricity under various scenarios, and I prepare wholesale power cost projections for our members. I've also performed analyses of the impacts of potential renewable resources on the Central system and performed analyses of economic development incentives. I have conducted generation expansion planning analysis to determine if our power suppliers' current generation fleets are sufficient to meet the energy needs of the future. In more recent years, I've taken on more supervisory roles and have engaged with our suppliers, including Santee Cooper, in joint planning exercises. The purpose of my testimony in this proceeding is to provide information on the 3 purchase power agreements, or PPAs, that Central negotiated with third parties, which will be used to supply a portion of the Santee Cooper load. The Central PPAs, as they are referred to as the Santee Cooper IRPs, were negotiated by Central pursuant to the terms of the contract currently in place between Central and Santee Cooper, known as the Coordination Agreement. It was executed in 1980 and has been amended several times since then. The amendment that established the processes that led to the negotiation of Central PPAs was executed in 2013. The 2013 amendment to the Coordination Agreement provided for a process for Central and Santee Cooper to follow in developing certain additional generation resources. A simplified description of the process, as it is relevant to Central PPAs, is that it requires the following steps. 1, Central and Santee Cooper jointly study the system's balance of loads and resources. Then Santee Cooper makes a determination that additional generation resources is needed. 2, Santee Cooper makes a proposal to Central for a shared resource. The proposal includes a detailed description of the proposed resource, including location, fuel source, new resource date, and the annual required capacity supplied by the proposed resource. 3, Central reviews the proposed shared resource and makes a decision as to whether to opt in or opt out of the proposed shared resource. If Central opts out of the proposed shared resource, then it is Central's right and obligation to independently make arrangements for generation that will replace its share of the proposed shared resource. A generation resource obtained by Central after an opt-out decision is known as a non-shared resource. In 2022, Santee Cooper followed this process by proposing a shared resource to Central. Central's board decided to opt out of that proposed shared resource. That decision triggered the need for Central to obtain alternative generation sources. Central followed a process to determine what resources it thought would be best to meet the generation needs that had been identified. That process led to the execution of the Central PPAs. The Central PPAs, as they are referred to in the Santee Cooper IRP, are 3 separate agreements with owners of existing generation resources with established records to deliver power to Santee Cooper beginning on January 1, 2029. These counterparties are Al Sanders Holdings LLC, Santa Rosa Energy Center LLC, and the North Carolina Municipal Power Agency number 1. All 3 PPAs have been executed. The PPA for NCMPA 1 is for 100 megawatts of baseload capacity from the Catawba nuclear plant. The Santa Rosa PPA is for approximately 220 megawatts of capacity from a combined cycle natural gas facility located in the Florida Power and Light system. And the Sandersville PPA is for 292 megawatts of peaking capacity from 4 combustion turbines located on the Georgia Power system. Additional information about the PPAs and their operating characteristics is shown on Exhibit A to my testimony. The fixed costs of Central's PPAs are the responsibility of Central and are not shared with Santee Cooper. And Central will pay most of the variable costs of the PPAs. It is Central's responsibility to arrange for transmission for the PPAs and to pay for the transmission costs. We are well into the process of making those arrangements and do not anticipate any problems in finalizing them. During the process of negotiating the PPAs, we have provided information to Santee Cooper on our efforts, and we have provided information about them to assist Santee Cooper in the preparation of its IRP. While 2 of the PPAs are considered confidential by our counterparties and are protected by non-disclosure agreements, we've been able to provide sufficient information to Santee Cooper for its use in planning to incorporate the Central PPAs into its plans. This concludes the summary of my testimony.
Mr. Bryant, let me ask one question. In your summary, when you describe the PPA with NCMPA 1, I believe you said 100 megawatts. Your pre-filed testimony said 150 megawatts. Which is correct, sir?
It's 150. I must have misspoken.
Okay. Just wanted to correct that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Bryant, for summarizing your testimony. Please answer any questions that the parties or the commission have for you.
Thank you, Mr. Elby. Sierra Club,
No questions.
Sasiba,
No questions, Madam Chair.
Century, never mind. SACE, CCL,
No questions.
Santee Cooper Industrial Customer Group,
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Google LLC,
No questions, thank you.
Santee Cooper,
No questions.
thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff,
No questions, Madam Chair.
thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belser. Good to see you this morning, Mr. Bryant, and thank you for being here. I recognize that your testimony was really about the PPAs, but I wondered if you would comment a little bit on the load that Central is seeing as a wholesale provider in terms of
Yes,
it being 2023, the conversations that we've been having about additional load expectations coming up.
yes, Santee, the state of South Carolina has been one of the fastest growing states in the country for the past few years. We've seen numbers that, we're number 4 in net in migration of all 50. So, and some of that has been coming into the Central and Santee Cooper service territory. So we've been seeing much faster residential and small commercial growth than usual. And the large commercial growth has become explosive. A few years ago, we would see someone come in and they say, okay, we're going to be a 10 megawatt load. And we'd say, wow, that's huge. Now we see companies coming in and say, yeah, we think we're going to be 200 megawatts. We might be 400 megawatts. And the state has been very successful in, getting a lot of large new manufacturing operations that are going to employ a lot of jobs. And this is very exciting, but it's also very stressful for those of us who are having to plan resources because the load forecast is going straight up, basically. And so it's going to be a challenge for us here in the next few years to figure out how to, serve this. And, thankfully, we've been able to work very successfully with Santee Cooper over the past year with the Cherokee combined cycle purchase, which, we thank you all for approving. And then for 2 additional PPAs. for about 300 megawatts of capacity to bring into the system. And so we're continuing to work with Santee Cooper on updating that generation plan and our joint efforts to make sure that we're able to serve all of this new load that comes into the state.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. I appreciate it. I'm glad your territories are experiencing some of that growth as well. Thank you. No further questions.
Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you. Good morning. I just had one question out of curiosity. In representing all the co-ops, the central co-op, kind of looking out for all of them, are there situations as far as economic development where the co-ops seem to get into competition, like one county against another or one co-op against another?
Yeah, so when companies do look at coming to the state of South Carolina, it's not unusual for them to identify 2 or 3 different spots around the state and compete with and try to see which county can give them the best deal, so to speak. Central treats all of our members the same in that respect. So if someone comes into 3 different co-ops and asks for quotes, they'll get the same service from us either way.
So Central doesn't get involved if there's that sort of competition between counties. And I guess any sort of incentives would come from county councils or from the county themselves, more from the co-op. Is that fair?
Central does work with the South Carolina Power Team that we do provide incentives, but if someone's looking at multiple co-ops, they would be offered the same incentives for each of the co-ops.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning, Mr. Bryant. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Have you reviewed the IRP, or were you involved in it in any way? Are you familiar with it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Central consulted with Santee Cooper throughout the process. We met with their team and kind of reviewed their findings, and then I've reviewed several times the written document and the supplemental testimony.
Do you or anyone at Central have any issues with the preferred supplemental IRP as proposed?
Yeah, no, the adjusted preferred supplemental. There's a lot of words there, but we don't have any objections to that. I think we kind of understand with all the growth that's coming into the state that we need to do kind of an all of the above approach to system planning. Multiple different resources, multiple different options, and so I think we're fairly supportive of the conclusions that they draw, and I believe our board has stated that its support for a lot of Santee Cooper's upcoming plans as well.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bryant. No more questions.
Commissioners, anything further for the witness?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin.
Good morning, Mr. Bryant. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning.
Appreciate all the work that the co-ops do for South Carolina and economic development and serving our state. The coordination agreement that you signed with Santee Cooper, does it have any provision that would allow you to opt out of the agreement at some point in time in the future?
We cannot opt out of the agreement. We can opt out of potential proposed shared resources that they offer, but we cannot opt out of the agreement. So the agreement runs till 2058, and there's no an early exit from it.
Okay. So essentially, one way or the other, you're either going to go forward with the PPAs, or you have the right to, if something happens, for example, with the 3 providers, do you have to cover with an additional power purchase agreement in the event that
Yes.
that was not available?
Yeah, so we're required to bring roughly 750 megawatts to the system by Jan 1, 2029. And so if, if something happens and we're not able to bring in, one of these resources or, our batteries aren't able to come online, then we'll have to figure out another way to do that. Yeah, there are some fairly severe penalties in the coordination agreement if we fail to supply our required capacity to the system on time.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Good morning, Mr. Bryant. Thank you for your testimony this morning. I just was curious about the transmission that arrangements that Central will be required to execute or obtain for these PPAs. Have you or has Central experienced any transmission constraints on the system?
Yeah, so there are absolutely limitations on transmission systems, both inside and within balancing authority, in between balancing authorities. And so, thankfully, we're looking quite a few years out into the future. And so we put in the transmission service requests for all the PPAs. And so all of the transmission providers are studying to say what upgrades, if any, will be needed to allow this power to be brought in without issues, because it's essential to us that it be able to be brought in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if that is how it's dispatched. And so right now we're just working through that process of identifying which upgrades, if any, will need to take place in order to allow that to happen. But again, thankfully, we have quite a few years between now and 2029, and so we fully expect there will be time for any potential needed upgrades to take place.
And I recognize that the IRP contains a section on needed transmission. Are the constraints mainly, are they within South Carolina, or is it getting the power to South Carolina, or both?
It's mainly the constraints would be the interfaces between Santee Cooper system and other utilities.
Okay.
So between Santee Cooper and Southern, or Santee Cooper and Duke.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate you answering my questions. Commissioners, any further questions for this witness? Mr. Ellerby, any redirect?
No redirect, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Bryant, thank you for your testimony and your appearance this morning, and you may stand down, and Mr. Ellerby is going to ask that you be excused, but that's at his peril.
Yes, I wasn't actually going to go through that or ask you to go through that, but Mr. Bryant will stand down, and we've asked for him to be excused. However, if there's a need for him to testify between now and the close of this hearing, we will make arrangements to get Mr. Bryant back in front of a camera for you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellerby. Appreciate that.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bryant. Have a good day.
Thank you.
I believe we're next going to Santee. Good morning, Mr. Witt. Hope you're feeling better.
Thank you, Chair Belser. I am feeling better. The symptoms are all gone. It's been 7 days, so I appreciate you asking.
Thank you.
Santee's witness is Arnie Olson.
Madam Court Reporter, if you'd swear the witness, please.
Mr. Olson, if you'll raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Mr. Olson, please state your name and business address.
My name is Arnie Olson, and my business address is 44 Montgomery Street, 1500, San Francisco, California, 94104.
By whom are you employed in what capacity?
I am a senior partner at Energy and Environmental Economics, otherwise known as E3.
On whose behalf are you testifying today?
I'm testifying today on behalf of the Carolinas Clean Energy Business Association.
Thank you. Did you prepare or cause to be prepared direct testimony consisting of 49 pages?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony?
I do not.
If I ask you the questions in your pre-filed direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Did you also prepare or cause to be prepared your Exhibit AOC-1 to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Are there any changes or corrections to your Exhibit AOC-1?
No, there are not.
Chair Belser, we'd like to move in his testimony and his one exhibit into evidence as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Olson's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the records as given from the stand. The attachment of his exhibit to his pre-filed testimony, I think it's A01, is that right? A01 will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit 16 and received into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Olson, do you have a summary of your direct testimony?
I do.
Would you give that summary at this time?
Yes. Chair Belser and Commissioners, I first want to thank you for the opportunity to come and testify in front of you this morning. I have over 30 years of experience in the energy industry, specializing in the areas of integrated resource planning, transmission planning, renewable energy planning, including renewable energy procurement, resource adequacy, renewable energy integration, rate and tariff design, wholesale market design, and energy policy and analysis. I've consulted for a wide variety of clients, including utilities, government agencies, transmission system operators, renewable energy developers, and large customers. I hold a Master of Science degree in International Energy Management and Policy from the University of Pennsylvania and Bachelor of Science degrees in Statistics and Mathematical Sciences from the University of Washington. I've testified as an expert in numerous proceedings before utility commissions across the country, including this commission and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. My direct testimony identifies best practices for evaluating renewable and energy storage resources in the context of Santee Cooper's proposed 2023 Integrated Resource Plan. I focus on three primary components of Santee Cooper's proposed plan. First, on the capacity value of solar and storage resources. Second, on solar integration costs. And third, on capacity expansion modeling assumptions, and particularly including the annual solar build limits. With respect to Santee Cooper's capacity need determination and capacity value accreditation, the approach used by Santee Cooper in its IRP for capacity need determination and capacity value accreditation should be improved upon in a number of substantive ways. Santee Cooper established its planning reserve margin, or PRM, requirement and calculated effective load carrying capability, or ELCC, using a generic combustion turbine, or CT, as a reference resource, which can experience forced outages. The emerging industry best practice is to calculate both PRM and ELCC for all resources relative to a perfect capacity equivalent. This ensures that the imperfections associated with all resources, thermal and non-thermal, are made visible to the capacity expansion model on an apples-to-apples basis, enabling a fair comparison among them and accordingly generating an accurate least cost outcome for the utility ratepayers. Santee Cooper's method socializes gas and coal outages by correcting for them with a higher PRM, while individually penalizing solar and storage resources. Gas resources in particular can experience significant challenges operating reliably during very cold conditions, as seen during recent major winter storms. If these correlated outage risks are considered, gas resources would have perfect capacity equivalent values, or ELCC values, significantly less than 100% of nameplate. If Santee Cooper had followed the industry best practices, the capacity expansion model would likely have selected more solar and storage, and fewer gas resources to meet future capacity needs. Santee Cooper represented solar and storage capacity values using one-dimensional ELCC curves. However, solar and storage resources interact with each other in positive ways in their ability to provide capacity. Now, Santee Cooper did include some of the interactive benefits between these two types of resources by calculating ELCCs at certain combinations of solar and storage. Now, this separate calculation uses hand-picked assumptions about how much solar and storage are on the system, which may not end up aligning with the volumes selected as cost-effective after those curves are used in the capacity expansion model. While Santee Cooper's simplification of the problem may be appropriate given the strongly winter-peaking nature of its system currently, the better practice is to use multidimensional ELCC surfaces that give the capacity expansion model a more accurate view of the capacity contribution of solar alone, storage alone, and solar and storage in all possible combinations. Turning to the integration costs, the approach used to calculate integration costs related to sub-hourly variability and uncertainty of solar energy is flawed and overestimates solar integration costs, especially for portfolios with battery storage or higher levels of solar capacity. Specifically, the method does not establish a uniform sub-hourly reliability standard for all portfolios. Instead, the method establishes a different, higher standard for portfolios with less coal generation and more gas generation or storage. Since solar is added as coal retires, the portfolios with solar are held to a higher standard than Santee Cooper's current system, which has little solar but more coal generation. Santee Cooper has presented no evidence that the inflexibility of its current system creates reliability challenges. Therefore, there is no justification for requiring future portfolios with higher solar penetration to be much more flexible than its system today with inflexible coal generation. If lower solar integration costs were used in Santee Cooper's IRP modeling, the more favorable economics of solar may lead to increased selection of solar relative to what Santee Cooper has presented. Finally, the method does not incorporate the flexibility benefit provided by battery storage. Lithium-ion batteries are the most flexible resources available today, capable of providing both upward and downward reserve services at up to 200% of their nameplate capacity, while simultaneously either charging or discharging, depending on relative grid economics throughout the operating day. A system with a reasonable quantity of battery storage capacity will have little trouble accommodating the sub-hourly fluctuations from large amounts of solar generation. Santee Cooper's modeling does not consider this possibility, and therefore significantly understates the value of solar and storage when added in combination. And further, the methodology sometimes produces results that are nonsensical, such as requiring a system that is highly flexible after adding battery storage capacity to carry more operating reserves than a system that is less flexible, which means that adding batteries somehow makes solar integration costs higher. Turning to the build limits, in Santee's proposal, a 300 megawatt per year annual build limit on solar was enforced in the modeling from 2026 to 2029. And this restriction limited solar addition in the model to 1,200 megawatts, which is a full 1,000 megawatts lower than the 2,200 megawatts that was found to be cost optimal by 2029 without those constraints. No analytical basis is offered for why this build limit is reasonable. Relaxing these limits would result in a more economic portfolio, providing savings to Santee Cooper's ratepayers. In addition, the amount of cost optimal storage build, 250 megawatts by 2040, when the system peak is 6 gigawatts, and the peak plus PRM is 7 gigawatts, is also lower than expected. They did increase the storage penetration to 400 megawatts by 2040 in the preferred plan. Based on my review, I make the following recommendations for improvements to Santee Cooper's proposed 2023 IRP. I recommend that Santee Cooper adopt a perfect capacity or PCAP PRM accounting framework in which the capacity need is assessed in terms of perfect capacity equivalent, and all resources, including conventional, firm, and thermal resources, are credited with the capacity value equal to their ELCC or perfect capacity equivalent. This adjustment would ensure that all potential resources are being compared on a level playing field. I also recommend that Santee Cooper use an ELCC surface to represent the combined ELCC of solar and storage.
Chair Belser.
Commissioner Williams?
Mr. Olson, I'm having to strain a little bit to hear you.
I apologize.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me know that. And I also recommend that Santee Cooper use an ELCC surface to represent the combined ELCC of solar and storage to allow the capacity expansion model to endogenously calculate the ELCC diversity benefits between solar and storage at different combinations of each resource. Finally, I recommend that Santee Cooper adjust the ELCC of solar, storage, and wind within each study year to reflect load growth over the IRP study period. While Santee Cooper is currently a winter peaking system that experiences very little loss of load in summertime, adopting these best practices will ensure that its methodologies remain up to date as winters get warmer and summers get hotter. Second, Santee Cooper should define a single standard for flexibility excursions and then use that standard for all of their integration cost simulations. In addition, they should align integration cost assumptions to capacity expansion model portfolios to the largest extent possible. Specifically, as batteries are added to the system, this will improve its flexibility and make it easier to integrate solar. Santee Cooper should reflect this benefit by calculating solar integration costs, assuming that batteries are in place. Lastly, Santee should consider calculating flexibility benefit for flexible resources such as batteries that are added in combination with solar. Third, no analytical basis was provided for the 300 megawatt per year build limit from 2026 to 2029. While I acknowledge and appreciate the real-world challenges associated with deploying a large amount of solar that is found to be cost-effective in a model, Santee Cooper should do everything it can to address these challenges and not let them get in the way of pursuing the least cost portfolio of resources on behalf of its customers. Santee Cooper should procure as much solar as they can with a target of 2,200 megawatts by 2029, in line with the cost optimal results without the annual build limit constraint. This would involve very little risk to the utility due to solar's low capacity value.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Did you prepare or cause to be prepared pre-file servable testimony consisting of 14 pages?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony?
I do not.
If I ask you the questions in your pre-file servable testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Chair Belser, I'd like to move Witness Olson's pre-file servable testimony into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Olson's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Olson, do you have a summary of your testimony?
I do.
Can you present that testimony?
Yes. So in my rebuttal testimony, I respond to rebuttal testimonies submitted on behalf of Santee Cooper. Specifically, I respond to Robert Davis's testimony discussing the solar build limits assumed by Santee Cooper, and to Nick Wintermantle's testimony discussing treatment of thermal resource outages and loss of load modeling and the solar integration cost methodology used in this IRP. In response to Witness Davis's justification that solar was limited to 1,500 megawatts prior to 2031 due to the high solar integration costs identified above this threshold, I explained that the IRP found that 2,200 megawatts of solar was cost optimal in 2029 when the build limit was removed, despite the high solar integration cost included in the model. Thus, the high solar integration costs Mr. Davis cites are already included in the modeling that determined that 2,200 megawatts of solar would be optimal. Procuring less than 2,200 megawatts of solar would result in a suboptimal and higher cost outcome for Santee Cooper's ratepayers, according to Santee Cooper's IRP. Additionally, as my testimony describes in detail and is further addressed below in my response to Mr. Wintermantle, the solar integration costs are overstated. If a more reasonable solar integration value were used, it is likely that even more solar would be cost effective and would reduce rates for Santee Cooper ratepayers. I also emphasize that while Santee Cooper's modeling decision to cap annual solar installations can be defended as a means to ensure enough other resources are available in the event a more aggressive build rate cannot be achieved, Santee Cooper should not let this arbitrary modeling choice get in the way of actually striving to achieve the least cost outcome for customers. In response to witness Wintermantle, I dispute this claim that Santee Cooper's decision to only evaluate forced outage data from 2017 to 2021 is sufficient to accurately assess the availability of gas plants during extreme winter weather events. I also discussed the significant evidence from recent years, including on Santee Cooper's system, that natural gas plants are vulnerable to correlated outages due to extreme cold weather events. Combined with other known outage risk factors for thermal resources, including risks identified elsewhere by Mr. Witness Wintermantle's firm, Astrape, that suggest that gas plant ELCC values could be as low as 76% of their nameplate. I recommend steps that should be taken to ensure that over-accreditation of natural gas resources does not result in a flawed integrated resource plan that fails to account properly for the system resource adequacy needs. In response to witness Wintermantle's justification for the assumed integration costs of solar, I elaborate on the conclusions of the Astrape study, which shows that the flexibility excursions presented in the solar integration cost study demonstrate that Santee Cooper can replace the Winyah coal facility with a combination of gas and close to 2,000 megawatts of solar with no degradation of system reliability from where it is today. Adding storage on top of that would then make Santee Cooper's system even more reliable.
Chair Belser, witness Olson is available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Witt. Sierra Club?
No questions from Sierra Club.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy?
No questions.
Central Electric Power Cooperative?
No questions.
Santee Cooper Industrial Customer Group?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Google LLC?
No questions from Google, Madam Chair.
Santee Cooper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the longest part of my cross was the walk over here to the podium. So, good morning, Mr. Olson. My name is Ashley Cooper. I'm counsel for Santee Cooper, and I have just a couple of questions for you this morning.
Good morning.
And I'm going to use the Elmo, so if I could have some assistance with that. And there'll be a screen that pops up here just in a second, Mr. Olson. Okay, let me see if I can zoom in for you. Can you read that? I can read it to you out loud as well.
Oh, I see. It's right here in front of me. Yes,
Yes,
I can see that
So
better
this
now.
this is just Act 90, and this goes to some of your testimony because essentially this asks for a balance of the most cost-effective and least ratepayer risk portfolio to meet the Public Service Authority's total capacity and energy requirements while maintaining safe and reliable energy service. Have I read that correct?
Yes.
And that's some of what your testimony is on, is the balancing of economics with reliability.
Yes.
And you talked about integration cost a good bit in your summary just now. And so I wanted to ask you a question. You're presumably you're familiar with NERC, the North American Reliability Corporation, correct?
North American Electric Reliability.
Yes, I'll leave out the electric. Thank you very much for the correction. And I wanted to see, were you able to factor any of this in to your testimony, their report from their inverter-based performance issues report, findings from their level 2 alert?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that report and the issues that it raises with the performance of inverter-based resources in certain circumstances. Those are the types of issues that are not really addressed in IRPs. They largely are being considered by NERC with respect to establishing standards for how those resources should perform in the context of these very specific events. So just for the Commission's benefit, there have been a few instances that have been noted, in a couple of them in Texas and one in Utah, where inverter-based resources have tripped offline in response to some slight disturbances in grid frequency. So something happens on the grid somewhere that causes a little bit of wiggle in the frequency. The inverter-based resource recognizes that, and to protect itself, it cuts offline, opens the ties to the grid, which then creates additional problems, because now not only have you lost the first resource, you've also lost the inverter-based resource in addition. So there's been, I think, 3 or 4 of those events that NERC has identified, and there's a lot of work being done on the kind of very specific engineering standards for how those resources need to connect to the grid to make sure that they don't represent a threat to the grid. But these are all things that are sort of below the level and not really considered in IRPs. They're really being addressed at the NERC level.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. That was effective use of a non-question by me, but I appreciate that nonetheless. Let me show you I appreciate your characterization, because that helps frame up NERC's characterization. Let's see if you can see this. I believe while you told the Commission it was just a couple of incidents, NERC said there were numerous disturbance reports published by the ERO enterprise provide strong evidence of systematic deficiencies in the performance of inverter-based resources during grid events. Furthermore, conclusions include deficiencies in modeling and study accuracy in IBR integration and performance observed in solar voltaic, battery energy storage, and wind resources. So that's a very different characterization than you just provided.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Objection, I'm afraid it wasn't a question. It's a statement that he believes it was different from the testimony. If he's got a question.
Mr. Cooper, rephrase the question, please.
Do you agree that NERC said there were numerous reports?
Yes, so numerous is an adjective. There's not a quantification here of what exactly numerous means. When you're the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, any of these events are concerning to you. And so when you see, 3 of them, you're concerned. When you see 5 of them, you're concerned. When you see 15 of them, you're concerned. You're concerned with instances when conventional resources trip offline as well. Something breaks, fuel line, something explodes. I mean, there are many reasons why all resource types can suffer outages, and some of those can be sudden outages that then the grid needs to be prepared to respond to. So, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of megawatts of inverter-based resources connected all over North America. It's not surprising if there were some issues with how some of those were connected due to the power engineering, that those would be identified given the long history that the industry has with these resources. NERC's doing its job, and it's identifying issues, and it's sounding the alarm to make sure that as we connect these resources, we get these engineering deficiencies corrected, which have caused a very small number, in NERC's condition numerous, but from I think a normal person's perspective, a very small number of events that as of yet haven't resulted in any widespread outages. The grids have had to respond in ways to prevent that, but they've been able to respond, and there's no instance in which any of these events have led to any widespread outage that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. And and in true, I want to read you what NERC said. And am I reading this correctly? NERC issued a level 2 alert, innovator-based resource performance issues, in March 2023 to provide strong recommendations for generator owners and all BPS-connected IBR facilities to improve performance of their resources. Am I correct? Did I read that right, that it was a strong recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. And we don't have to go through these, but I want to show you their recommendations.
Vice Chair Powers?
Mr. Cooper, could you leave these up long enough for us to read them?
Yes, sorry.
I'm not sure if that's Mr. Cooper or if that's in the back, so we need, if we could leave it on the screen, please.
All right, let me just see if I can zoom in. Sorry, Commissioner. So, Commissioner, I started reading with the text on the left, and then my last question was this gray box. It's a little bit hard to see, but tell me when you're ready for me to proceed.
Well, the next one, just leave it up there long enough for us to read them.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sorry about that. And so here are some key findings that I want to talk through with you in recommendations. And it ranges from, they found that many of the GOs indicated they did not have requested data, facility data readily available for NERC to complete their studies. It also said ranged from there to they had about 5,200 megawatts of bulk electric system IBRs having voltage and frequency protections in settings within the NERC PRC 024 no trip zone. NERC recommends that all IBRs, both BES and non-BES, have parameters protection settings outside of the no trip zone. To the last, just saying about a quarter of the reported facilities use a fault ride through that does not adequately support BPS reliability. So it's certainly reasonable to say that there could be future NERC action along these lines, correct?
I mean, yes, I certainly expect NERC to issue some additional standards that might affect the way that these resources are interconnect with and interact with the bulk electric system.
Okay, thank you. And I want to switch, well, Commissioner, I'm now finished, thank you. Thank you, I'm finished with the ILMO. I want to switch gears with you. Just want to make sure you referred in your summary to the 300 megawatt limit that Santee Cooper was imposing on solar. I don't know if you heard the witness Painter yesterday, but he clarified that was not a limit, it was a target, and they could exceed that limit in any 1 year. Did you hear that?
I did.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, you're here on behalf of SCEBA, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because you talked a lot about cost to the using and consuming public, about bringing on low cost solar for the benefit of ratepayers, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you're aware that the Office of Regulatory Staff is charged with the interest of representing the interest of the using and consuming public, and their findings are that Santee Cooper's IRP complies with Act 90, correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olson. No further questions.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions for this witness, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for this witness? Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning.
Good morning.
I need you to kind of talk through the 2,200 megawatts and then the 1,200 megawatts, if I got that right, from the IRP's perspective. Like, could you take me to either the supplemental or the original IRP and show me what you're talking about?
I will do my best. I'm not sure I have all of the page references here at my disposal.
I understand. I could also ask you another question if it helps you to kind of think through this one as I pitch a different question to you. Your choice.
Well, I'll just note first that the economically optimal portfolio identified 2,200 megawatts of solar installations by 2029 as being the least cost portfolio. So that's where the 2,200 comes from. It's straight from their IRP. It's the economically optimal portfolio. So that is, pertaining to the last question, according to the IRP, the amount of solar in 2029 that would minimize costs to Santee Cooper ratepayers.
And it is a daunting situation to be in our shoes and have the amount of material in front of us. So if there is that is in the original IRP?
It's in the original IRP, and I believe it's in Mr. Painter's
Right.
direct testimony as
Right.
well. So I could try to find that. But then maybe to further answer the question, then the 300 megawatt build limit, which is just a modeling limit, it's not
Right. Right.
it doesn't bind them in the future, but that then results in only 1,200 megawatts of solar procurement by 2029, which again is 1,000 megawatts less than what the model suggests is the optimal amount in 2029. I want to recognize.
Go ahead.
I just was going to recognize the discussion yesterday with Mr. Painter that the 300 megawatts wasn't intended ever to be a hard limit, which I found very encouraging. What was a little bit discouraging was that it was, in his words, it was still meant to be a target. So it was still meant to be, we're going to try to get to 1,200 megawatts by 2029. And my view is that if 2,200 megawatts is the economically optimal number, that ought to be the target. And if you can only get 300 megawatts each year because of practical considerations, you can't interconnect it fast enough, you can't sign the contracts fast enough, just things happen to delay that, then that's okay. But they ought to try to procure the amount that's optimal and best for ratepayers.
To your knowledge, is the 2,200 megawatts that's reflected in the economic operable model, is that included in the addendum?
I'm sorry, and I just did find the table in
you.
Mr. Painter's testimony. It's page 43 of 55 of his direct testimony. And it's table 6.
Okay. I'd just like that for the record, and that'll help me as I ponder this. My other question, do you happen to have ORS's testimony from witness Hyatt?
I do not.
Okay. There are a number of recommendations that ORS had that are identified that will be processed and pondered in future IRPs. And my question is how you feel about those and whether some of the questions that you're raising could be resolved in an update, and would it, in your opinion, need to be resolved in an update or a future full IRP?
I don't have the list in front of me, but if you wanted to ask me the ones that you're concerned about, I'd be happy to respond as I can.
So E1, renewables, ORS recommends Santee Cooper investigate higher penetrations of solar and wind resources in the next effective load carrying capacity study and discuss the results with the stakeholder working group.
Yes, so this is where the ELCC study that Astrape performed for Santee Cooper was somewhat limited. It considered a small set of potential solar, wind, and battery storage combinations. They had to go to, I think, a Duke study to look at battery storage above whatever that level was, 400 megawatts. So I think this means that they should do a more fulsome study of various different combinations of wind and solar and battery storage in the future to provide Santee Cooper specific information to feed into future IRPs. So I think it could be resolved. And then in conjunction with that information, they can What I would recommend that they do is evaluate whether a one-dimensional ELCC curve continues to be an acceptable simplification of what really is a kind of multidimensional space. So for the current, Santee Cooper's current situation where they don't see hardly any loss of load in the summer, my judgment is a single dimensional solar and storage independently, that's acceptable. But they should recognize that the best practice is to do a multidimensional surface where you look at solar and storage in combination and see, is that better? Is the whole better than the sum of the parts? And in many systems across the country, it is. For Santee Cooper's situation, that difference is relatively small. But we should recognize that's a simplification. And each time you go through the process, look at what the best practices are, evaluate what simplifications are appropriate, and whether this one continues to be appropriate.
And is that the study that you just described something that is achievable in months, years, decades? How
No.
complicated is the study?
Yeah, this is maybe a 3-month study that most utilities will do as part of their regular IRP cycle. And Santee Cooper has done that as well with the STRAPE, but they gave them really a very limited amount of stuff to look at. They should just, if they just expand that and consider a few more degrees of freedom, then that would make that a more comprehensive and better foundation for Santee Cooper's next IRP.
E2 is renewables. ORS recommends Santee Cooper provide justifications in rebuttal testimony for the 300 megawatt annual limit, which of course we understand is a target or a not a cap. Do you want to wait? That one's incorporated. Renewables ORS recommends integration and associated modeling methodologies, including modeling operating reserves, be discussed further in the stakeholder working group. Do you have a comment there?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, this is the solar integration cost methodology that was used for this IRP. Again, I believe is flawed, and it results in solar integration costs that are significantly higher than what I see on other systems and significantly higher than what my intuition would tell me to expect. So yeah, I do think that reevaluating that methodology, and in particular, this issue that as you add more flexible resources to the system, that you move the goalposts and make that system perform more and more reliable. The more flexible it is, the higher standard that you have to hold solar to. This is what causes it to come back with these nonsensical results that say it's more expensive to integrate solar when I have a bunch of batteries than it is when I don't have a bunch of batteries. So yeah, they should take another look at that methodology. There's no evidence at all that Santee Cooper's system today, with inflexible coal and 5.7 flexibility excursions per year, is causing them to suffer any NERC compliance violations or pay any NERC penalties or impacts the reliability of their system in any way. So there's no reason why any future system should be held to an increasingly stringent reliability standard. 5.7 seems to be okay.
And a study like that, what does that take? How intensive is it?
Well, again, this is a study that STRAPE already performed on behalf of Santee Cooper, and is the kind of thing that a utility would do as part of its regular IRP cycle. So it's really just a matter of going back to that methodology and looking at ways to make it better, looking at my recommendations and others, and making sure that the methodologies that's used next time is more in line with best practices.
And you gave me a ballpark 3-month on the prior estimate. Do you have how intensive, how difficult is it to update this?
It's a similar type of a study.
Mr. Olson, I appreciate it. Thank you for your patience in my lack of understanding and my desire to understand more.
Thank you.
Commissioners, questions for this witness? Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
I was trying to understand, I guess, the PCAP versus the conventional. And, you know, when I read it, I think I understood what I read, but I still could not grasp the difference, or I couldn't explain it, if you can, to where maybe I can understand the distinction or why, you know, why one's better than the other.
And here I do have a chart that it might be helpful for you to refer to. It's on page 15 of my direct testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Figure 3.
Yeah. Yes, I looked at that, and I'm more embarrassed to tell you there's just too much going on there.
Well, then my graph making skills have didn't do their job, because it's
no, that I'm sure that's a weak link on my end, but I guess instead of the conventional way, you say if it's 500 megawatts and it's a 5% outage, you would figure 525 megawatts versus the perfect, I think, capacity or PCAP, which you would figure instead of 500, it would be 5% less, so you would only have 475 megawatts available. Is that, in essence, the math premise, I guess?
Yes. So in that example, if you assume, let's say that the ELCC of that gas plant is 95%, then 5% of the nameplate capacity can't be counted on, which is 25 megawatts out of the 500. So that's just a fact. That's just because the gas plant isn't perfectly available. No plant is, and that's what the graphic really, all it's intended to represent is every one of these resources has something that prevents it at some time from not being there when you really need it the most. No resource is perfect. So that's just a fact. And what the PCAP methodology does is it recognizes that no resource is perfect, and it compares them all to the one on the right, which is this kind of theoretical perfect capacity resource. So every resource gets a haircut, if you will, relative to a perfect capacity based on whatever its own unique characteristics are. The sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, my storage runs out after 4 hours, my gas plant can suffer a forced outage, my coal plant can suffer a forced outage. So that's why we say the PCAP methodology is what puts everybody on a level playing field, and whatever it is that's preventing them from performing, that gets held against them in the accreditation. So when you go forward and you give the model the choices of all the resources, it's picking the perfect capacity equivalent of all of those resources. What the conventional methodologies did, and the ICAP methodology, is it assumes that the firm resources are perfect.
I think you got it now.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Great, yeah, so the conventional method, which Santee Cooper continues to use, treats the conventional resources as if they're perfect. So the natural gas resource or a coal resource would get 100% of their nameplate, and then you would make up for that. You would socialize the fact that those 25 megawatts really aren't available by just raising the PRM.
But this isn't unique to Santee Cooper. This is fairly ubiquitous across the industry, is it not?
Well, no, fair enough. And as we are now adding resources with different characteristics than what we're used to. So we're used to resources mostly that are thermal, and they're either on or they're off. And you can just kind of treat them as if they all have the same force outage and add it all up and just raise the PRM and it's all fine, because the resources weren't that different from each other. But now we're adding resources that are very different from each other. Solar, wind are just very different. You can't continue to use that same methodology. And so everyone across the industry has been reevaluating, well, does that old methodology make sense? Or do we need to adapt it? And when do we need to adapt it to reflect the fact that a large proportion of our capacity is now coming from unconventional or variable or dispatch limited resources? And in doing so, we learned that the old method was actually kind of a simplification. It kind of said, well, look, we'll just treat these gas plants as if they're perfect, even though everyone knew that they weren't. And that was fine as long as all the resources were firm. But now that some of them are firm and some of them are dispatch limited and some of them are variable, we need to do a little bit more work to make sure that we're giving the model an honest choice to make among those different resource types.
You don't use the term paradigm shift, but you do say there's a paradigm increasing, I guess.
Yeah.
I think you noted Nova Scotia Power in California that have, I'm assuming, adopted this PCAP for their IRPs. Is that?
Yes, that's correct. And there are others as well. And I describe it as an emerging best practice, which just recognizes that there are many utilities in Santee Cooper's position today. And again, I think that what they're doing today is a good simplification. It's a fine, acceptable simplification given the characteristics of their system. But everyone is looking and moving towards this newer way of doing things, and Santee Cooper should reevaluate each cycle whether and when they want to make this shift.
Are you at liberty, or are you able to say who some of those others are? Because these are only two I see.
El Paso Electric is another one. I'd have to think a little bit about some of the others, but
that's all right.
Well, I will note, actually, if I might, Commissioner,
yes,
that this is a shift that's being made. I was thinking just IRPs, but this shift is being made first in the capacity markets, in PJM and in the Midwest, Mid-Continent ISO, the New York ISO. All three of those are moving toward this PCAP type of a system where they evaluate all resources based on their ELCCs or their perfect capacity equivalents. And they're a little bit ahead of the IRPs in a sense, because they aren't just using this to pick from new resources where simplifications are acceptable. They're settling and clearing billions of dollars of capacity payments based on these calculations. So where they're looking at these, where the most money is at stake, they are adopting the methodology that I describe here as the emerging best practice.
And Mr. Olson, I appreciate it. I think you did as good a job as you could with me, and I do understand it better. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions.
Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Olson, can you explain a little bit more about the balancing standard and how it sounds as if you're saying that they violated NERC's standard in some way? I'm not real sure I understand that with the flexibility.
Yes. Let's see. So utilities have always had to use their supply resources and ramp them, let's say, vary the output of the supply resources to reflect the variability of load. So load varies minute to minute, hour to hour. It's always moving up and down. There's always supply resources that are responding up and down. That's always been that way. As we've added variable resources to the system, wind first and now solar, those are increasing the net load variability that the system has to manage. So they're adding sources of variability.
Increasing the flexibility.
Increasing the need for flexibility.
Okay.
Yes, because there's more variability that the system has to deal with. And so there's been literature developed on how to measure that increase in the need for flexibility, and then how to attribute that to new resources like solar and wind that are causing some of that need, frankly, right? So this is just the sort of intuitive basis of what these studies do. Now, the challenge is that there is no standard for how much flexibility you're allowed to have and how many times you're allowed to not meet that flexibility need on a go-forward basis. So the way that this would ultimately land if the utility didn't have enough flexibility is that they might suffer a NERC violation. So, the load goes high and the solar goes down. They don't have enough of their own resources to respond to that. And so they end up drawing power from the rest of the interconnection to make up for the gap that they have on their own system. And if their gap is too large, or if it happens too frequently, then they might subject themselves to NERC penalties as a result of that. Now, there's a whole literature, the standards on, how often that can happen and how big those violations can be. But that's in effect what they're trying to avoid with this kind of going forward study. But NERC doesn't have any sort of go forward standards, so it's all kind of guesswork about how much stuff I need to make sure that I never subject myself to a NERC violation. And this is where, because there is no NERC standard, the methodology kind of requires that you make one up.
Well, you were discussing with Commissioner Caston about the methodology that you used, or the model that you did to make the determinations with the PCAP for your calculation. Are utilities using this model that you are using, or if they're not, why not?
You referring back to the PCAP methodology and the ELCC method, yeah. And as I discussed with Commissioner Caston, this is an emerging best practice in utility IRPs. So there are a number of utilities, Nova Scotia Power, as was mentioned, California, where we're working with Estrape actually as our subcontractor on that project, El Paso Electric, that are using this PCAP methodology in their IRPs.
So they are used. I mean, when you said best practices, that's what we're all aiming at.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions for this witness? Hearing none. Mr. Witt, any redirect?
Yes, Chair. Mr. Olson, Mr. Cooper asked you about NERC findings regarding inverter-based resources in November 2023. You remember that?
Yes.
And Mr. Cooper pointed out various bullet points from the summary of that document. Let me ask you, has Santee Cooper itself projected the use of inverter-based resources in its own IRP?
Yes, it's identified, as we discussed, 2,200 megawatts of solar resources, which are inverter-based resources, as the most economic outcome for its ratepayers in 2029.
Do you think that based on your expertise and training that Santee Cooper would project over 1,500 megawatts of solar and hundreds of megawatts of storage if it believed those resources to be unreliable?
I don't think they would do that.
Okay. Finally, are you familiar with Winter Storm Elliott from December 2022?
Yes, I am.
Do you know whether or not NERC has reviewed the performance of gas resources in the Eastern Interconnect during Winter Storm Elliott? And did they make recommendations about proper operation of those resources?
Yes, they did. Recommendations related to winterization of those resources so that they can perform better during extreme cold weather events. That's one of the recommendations that they made.
Well, do you think those recommendations mean that gas resources are unreliable?
It does mean that gas resources aren't perfectly reliable, and it means that NERC is viewing, is again, doing its job and identifying potential threats to reliability from all the potential sources and taking steps to rectify those in the future, including from gas resources.
Okay, I have no further questions, Chair Belser, and thank you, Witness Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Witt. Mr. Cooper, very limited.
Very limited. Mr. Olson, very limited redirect. You were asked some questions by my friend, Mr. Witt, about Santee Cooper calling for significant additions of solar resources in its IRP, correct?
Yes.
And about the reliability of those. Would Santee Cooper be aware of the reliability of those resources, correct?
Yes, he asked me if Santee Cooper would project those resources in its IRP if it was concerned that they weren't reliable.
Okay. And so isn't it also fair to assume that in developing its IRP, Santee Cooper would consider Act 90 and the balance that Act 90 requires between least ratepayer risk and reliability?
I believe it's required to consider that balance, yes.
Okay. And so in developing its schedule to bring on, as Mr. Witt said, a significant amount of solar resources, isn't it fair to assume that Santee Cooper developed a schedule that appropriately balances bringing on a significant amount of solar in a way that achieves least cost payer, the most cost advantage way for retail customers, but balances risk to the system?
Santee Cooper, again, is required to balance all those interests, and as it develops its resource plan, it obviously needs to make its own judgments about what that appropriate balance is. But I'm here to testify that, my professional opinion, the risks of procuring somewhat more than 300 megawatts of solar per year, let's say 500 megawatts of solar per year for 4 years to get closer to that 2,200 megawatts, are very, very limited, especially given the fact that Santee Cooper has hardly given solar any capacity credit anyway, so it's already going to have enough other resources to ensure that it can operate the system reliably, even if all of the solar were offline.
Thank you very much. Chair, no further questions.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Olson, thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate your testimony and your appearance, and you may stand down.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Chair Belser, we understand the status of Witness Olson without you having to go through it. We understand that, but I'd like to talk about the status of Attorney Burns. We would like to, he would like to end his hearing participation with this witness, and I will be in person today, and if it goes until tomorrow or whenever, I'll be present. But Mr. Burns would like to conclude his participation if it's okay with the chair.
Mr. Witt, I will leave it up to you two counsel to figure out who needs to be here. I mean, You're both welcome, but if y'all can get by with one or the other, that's up to y'all.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be listening in and participating virtually, but would appreciate being able to do that from Raleigh if that's all right. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Belser.
Thank you, Mr. Witt. Anything else from Santee right now?
No, ma'am.
That was your only witness. Okay. Now, do we go to Sierra Club?
Yes, thank you. Sierra Club would like to call Debbie Glick.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Ms.
Thank
Jaffe,
you.
go ahead.
Ms. Glick, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Devi Glick, Deviglick.
And who are you employed by and in what capacity?
I am a senior principal for Synapse Energy Economics.
And did you cause to be prepared and pre-filed in this case 61 pages of testimony in both a public and confidential version on September 22nd, 2023?
Yes, I did.
And did you also cause to be prepared and pre-filed in this case corrected direct testimony that was filed on October 17th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any additional changes to that testimony as it was corrected?
I do not.
And if I were to ask you the same questions contained in your pre-filed testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would move that Ms. Glick's pre-filed corrected direct testimony in both public and confidential versions be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Glick's corrected direct testimony will be entered into the record. The confidential version will be maintained under seal.
Thank you. And Ms. Glick, did you also cause to be prepared and pre-filed in this case with your direct testimony 21 exhibits labeled DG-1 through DG-21?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you have any changes or revisions to those exhibits?
I do not.
Madam Chair, I would like to move into the record the exhibits attached to Ms. Glick's pre-filed direct testimony.
And I believe there's confidential material in those exhibits as well.
There are not. All 21 are public.
Oh, I'm on the wrong line. Never mind. My notes are only as good as I can read them. Ms. Glick's pre-filed direct testimonies, DG1 through DG21, will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 17 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. And Ms. Glick, did you also cause to be prepared and pre-filed in this case 24 pages of surrebuttal testimony on November 17th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
And did you have an opportunity to review that surrebuttal testimony?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or revisions to it?
I do not.
And if I were to ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would move that Ms. Glick's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony be moved into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Glick's surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand.
And Ms. Glick, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
And can you please read it?
Sure. My direct testimony in this case focuses primarily on Santee Cooper's decision to delay the retirement of the Wynya coal plant until 2031 and to replace it with a new 1.15 gigawatt combined cycle natural gas plant to be shared with Dominion, South Carolina. I evaluate Santee Cooper's justification for delaying the retirement of Wynya by 2 years beyond when its own modeling showed was lowest cost. I explain my concerns with some of Santee Cooper's key modeling assumptions and decisions, including Santee Cooper's use of a very low capital cost estimate for the new proposed shared resource, Santee Cooper's hard coding of the retirement dates for all of its coal plants in all its scenarios, and Santee Cooper's decision not to update its modeling to evaluate the impact of the additional greenhouse gas standards for fossil fuel-fired power plants under Section 111 of the Clean Air Act as proposed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency earlier this year. I present the results of my own modeling analysis, which does reflect the proposed greenhouse gas rules, and discuss my findings that retiring Wynya sooner than 2031 and replacing it with clean energy resources will be lower cost and lower risk for Santee Cooper's ratepayers in the current regulatory environment compared to continuing to rely on its legacy fossil resources. In my testimony, I first describe how Santee Cooper's 2023 IRP is the company's first official IRP that it has been required to present to the Commission for approval subject to a full evidentiary process. It is also the first IRP where Santee Cooper utilized full capacity expansion and production cost modeling. I explain how this resource plan comes at a time of substantial regulatory change, most notably with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, which will continue to make renewables and clean energy resources more economic for ratepayers, and with the EPA's proposal of additional greenhouse gas rules under Section 111 of the Clean Air Act, which will continue to make fossil-powered resources less economic for ratepayers. I present my findings from my review of Santee Cooper's IRP report and modeling files. I find that Santee Cooper has not properly justified its decision to delay the retirement of WINYA from 2028 until the end of 2030, and its decision to keep Cross online for the next few decades. I find that Santee Cooper hard-coded in the retirement date for its coal resources in all of its portfolios instead of letting the model identify or spit out an economically optimal retirement date for these resources. I find that none of Santee Cooper's portfolios are truly economically optimized, even the one it calls its economically optimized portfolio. Nonetheless, the results of the economically optimized portfolio with a 2028 retirement date for WINYA hard-coded in was lower cost than the preferred portfolio with a 2031 retirement date hard-coded in for WINYA. I also find that the company relied on input cost and operational assumptions that skewed the modeling results in favor of new gas resources and against renewables and market purchases. Specifically, Santee Cooper's wind costs were high, its build limits or targets unnecessarily restricted solar PV additions in the near term, its capacity accreditation for 8-hour battery storage was too low and not supported by any analysis. Additionally, the company relied on renewable integration costs and results from a study that locked in the inflexible WINYA power plant through 2031, even though those costs are not reflective of the integration costs for a more flexible and nimble system with an earlier WINYA retirement date. All of these assumptions unnecessarily restricted the availability of or inflated the cost of clean energy resources. Santee Cooper also modeled very limited market energy as a resource option, which is out of step with how it has historically operated and which made its system look like it needed more energy and capacity than if it had assumed more regional integration. Finally, the capital cost Santee Cooper modeled for the new proposed gas resource is overly optimistic and far below other reasonable industry estimates for similar power plants. Specifically, it is lower than the level Dominion, South Carolina modeled for the exact same shared resource, and below the level I have seen modeled by other utilities, both in IRPs and CPCN applications, even when taking into account differences in capital structure between Santee Cooper and other investor-owned utilities. Based on my own independent modeling using the same capacity expansion and production cost software that Santee Cooper used, and the same low capital cost assumptions for the new combined cycle shared resource, I find that if the proposed Section 111 rules are finalized, ratepayers will be saved around $170 million if WINYA and Cross are retired early, relative to a future where the plants remain online through their proposed retirement dates. Specifically, it will be more economic for Santee Cooper to retire WINYA by 2028 and to retire Cross by the end of 2034, and to replace both with clean energy resources rather than continuing to operate them through 2030 and the end of the study period, respectively. This is because with early retirement, Santee Cooper can avoid costly environmental retrofits, reduce pollution, and improve human health for essentially the same cost as keeping the plants online as proposed by Santee Cooper. With implementation of the proposed Section 111 rules, the cost to operate the company's fossil resources, both new and existing, both coal and gas, including Cross, Rainy, and the new proposed shared resource, will be much higher than Santee Cooper projects. Additionally, as I model in my portfolios, the operation of the proposed shared combined cycle resource, as well as the operation of Santee Cooper's existing combined cycle plant at Rainey, will be limited to a 50% capacity factor. Santee Cooper would have to invest in costly carbon capture and storage technology, or else convert the plants to co-fire on hydrogen to operate at a higher than 50% capacity factor. I recommend that Santee Cooper revise its IRP to model the proposed Section 111 rule and the compliance pathways available for its existing and proposed fossil resources. I also recommend that Santee Cooper revise many of its input assumptions in its IRP, specifically relax the annual build limits on solar PV that Santee Cooper imposed in the preferred portfolio, offer the model long-duration battery storage as a resource option, replace the low ELCC capacity accreditation values for 8-hour battery storage and wind by extrapolating the values from other regionally relevant studies, or else conducting Santee Cooper's own studies for those resources. Model updated capital costs for new solar PV, wind, and battery storage resources that reflect more current costs and market trends. Model capital costs for the proposed shared natural gas resource that more closely align with the projections Dominion South Carolina uses, or which otherwise reflect the possibility the project could face cost escalations relative to the company's optimistic projections, and allow for increased levels of market energy purchases that more closely align with industry standards. Finally, I recommend that Santee Cooper begin issuing an all-source RFP and focus its near-term procurement efforts on renewable resources. I also recommend that any future CPCN proceedings for the shared resource be informed by an all-source RFP that also allows for bids from solar, PV, and battery storage.
Thank you, Ms. Glick. Did you also prepare a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
If you could please read that.
Sure. In my rebuttal testimony, I respond to the supplemental modeling that Santee Cooper prepared at the request of ORS. I respond to criticisms of my own analysis, and then I respond to the company's defense of its own modeling decisions. In my review of the supplemental modeling that Santee Cooper prepared, I find that none of the updated modeling runs address my key recommendations or concerns, and if anything, the assumptions in the updated runs further exacerbate many of my concerns. All scenarios ORS requested lock in the retirement of WINYA in 2031. I also explain how Santee Cooper missed the opportunity to update its modeling runs to evaluate the impact of the proposed greenhouse gas rules in its preferred portfolio, or to evaluate the risk to ratepayers of increased gas price volatility from its reliance on the new combined cycle gas plant. Next, I respond to Santee Cooper's critiques that my modeling should be ignored because it focused on a future where the proposed Section 111 rules are finalized. I explain how important it is for Santee Cooper to plan for a future with some level of increased carbon regulation, given the trend of increasing federal regulation of the inputs and waste streams of fossil fuel-powered resources. I explain why it was reasonable for me to model long-duration battery energy storage resources as a long-term resource option, given the current deployment of a number of long-duration battery storage pilot projects around the country. Finally, I respond to Santee Cooper's defense and discussion of a number of its own modeling decisions. I reiterate the importance of the company understanding the impact of increased carbon regulations, such as those proposed under Section 111 on its preferred portfolio, instead of waiting until the next IRP filing. I explain the importance of Santee Cooper not placing unnecessary limits or even targets on its solar deployment in its modeling in the near term, and explain instead that Santee Cooper should see how much solar it can get in the market. As an analogy, if I am asked to do 5 push-ups in 30 seconds, because that seems like a doable number, I will do 5 push-ups. If I am told to do as many push-ups as possible in 30 seconds, I might do 5, I might do 8, I might do 12, but I won't know that if I am limited and told my target is 5. I discuss my concerns with the company's reliance on its solar integration study and explain that any limitations on solar PV additions prior to 2031 are being driven by the inflexibility of the Wynyard coal plant that it assumes will retire in 2031 and not some inherent system condition that will disappear in 2031. I respond to the company's defense of its low capital cost assumptions for the proposed shared resource and explain that the company's low capital cost assumptions resulted in Santee Cooper understating the likely cost of the proposed resource by over $500 million. I discuss that if I update my analysis for the 111's compliance scenarios and use Dominion South Carolina's capital costs for the shared resource instead of Santee Cooper's, I would now find $721 million in cost savings for Santee Cooper ratepayers from retiring the coal plants early relative to the baseline retirement date Santee Cooper has proposed. So in conclusion, I reiterate the importance of Santee Cooper acting now to evaluate the impact of the greenhouse gas rules and sharing the results of its analysis with ratepayers and state commissioners. Evaluating the impact of the proposed rule does not lock Santee Cooper into making any specific resource decisions, but it does provide the utility with an understanding of the impacts of the rule so Santee Cooper is better prepared when the rule is finalized instead of having to start from scratch at that time. It can also show Santee Cooper which resource options are no regrets options. Failing to act to evaluate this greenhouse gas rule does not make the rule any less likely to be finalized, but it will make Santee Cooper less prepared to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the witness is now available for cross.
Thank you, Ms. Jaffe. Sasiba? Questions? Cross?
I'm sorry, no question.
Thank you. Say CCL?
Good morning, Ms. Glick. I'm Kate Mixon, representing South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Morning.
I just have a couple of questions for you. So you conducted Encompass modeling in this proceeding, correct?
That's correct.
And in your extensive experience, you reviewed the Encompass or other capacity expansion modeling done by many utilities. Is that right?
That's correct.
Are you aware that Santee Cooper's modeling of battery resources in Encompass in this proceeding only permitted battery resources to cycle 1 time per day?
Yes, I did see that. They used that constraint in the Encompass model.
From your experience reviewing various utilities modeling, is that typical for how utilities model batteries in their capacity expansion modeling?
No, it's not normal to limit it to 1 cycle per day because that can prohibit, if the battery starts to cycle and then only partially cycles, it means it can't cycle again that day. So like it could literally just cycle and use 1% of its, what it has stored. And then if it turns off to save it for later, it can't use that. So that's not a super realistic way to model it.
Do you agree that's not standard utility practice?
No, it's not how we model it. It's not how I've seen others model it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are all of my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. And I meant to do this before we got into cross, but why don't we take a short break? We've been going a little while, and Ms. Glick, you're under oath. Please don't discuss your testimony or allow it to be discussed in your presence, and we will come back at 11:30. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back from the break as we continue in the hearing in docket number 2023-154E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Appearing virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. We're on cross-examination of witness Glick from the Sierra Club, and we will continue with cross by Central Electric Power Cooperative. Mr. Ellerby.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Santee Cooper and Industrial Customer Group.
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Google LLC.
No questions, thank you.
Santee Cooper.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, my name is Ashley Cooper, and I'm a lawyer on behalf of Santee Cooper. I believe you talked about the amount of battery resources installed in the U.S. Is that correct?
In my testimony?
Yes.
I believe so. You'll have to direct me to exactly where if you want specifics.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can walk through it. And just subject to check, but the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, they report that there are approximately 13,000 megawatts of battery resources installed in the U.S. as of 2023. Subject to check, does that sound about right?
That sounds reasonable.
And that the EIA also reports that there's approximately 32,000 megawatts of battery resources are planned, which would, added to what's already in, would come up to around 45,000 megawatts that's installed and planned. Subject to check, does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I mean, usually those numbers have a lot more behind them, a lot more context about like the size of them, where they are in the interconnection queue, but I think as high-level summary numbers, those sound reasonable.
Okay. So would it surprise you that the installed amount represents, in terms of capacity, that would be about 1% of the capacity that's currently on the system now, approximately, subject to check.
Can you restate what you're saying is 1% of what?
So it would the installed amount of 13,000 megawatts would be about 1% of the currently installed capacity in the U.S.
Of nameplate capacity or firm capacity in the U.S.?
Nameplate capacity.
Sure.
Subject to check.
I don't have those numbers right in front of me.
But, okay. Approximately 1%. Does that sound reasonable? Subject to check.
Yeah, I don't have any of these numbers in front of me, so.
And then just one last one, and I'll get to my point. And so even if we take the 45,000 in terms of capacity in the U.S., that would be about 3%. Does that sound reasonable? Subject to check.
Yeah, once again, I have none of these numbers in front of me, so.
Okay. And so if you were to apply those same percentages to Santee Cooper's system, that would be a range of battery storage that would range from about 60 megawatts to 170 megawatts if we were to apply those same percentages to Santee Cooper's system. Subject to check, does that sound reasonable?
Are you asking if 1 to 3% of Santee Cooper's system would represent
60 to 170 megawatts?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to switch topics now to the Section 111 rule that you spent a good bit of time on. So are you aware that on November 20th, the EPA issued a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking to extend the comment period following completion of a small business advocacy review of the rule?
I understand that, yeah, there was additional time given.
Okay. And are you aware that the ranking member of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee, along with 27 other senators, urged the EPA to further extend the comment period because of the extensiveness of the rule?
I haven't been following what's been going on in Congress with it, but I would accept that subject to check.
Okay. And are you aware that the ranking member of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee previously announced plans to use the Congressional Review Act to review the rule if adopted in its current form?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Are you aware that the ORS recommended that Santee Cooper discuss the potential impacts of the EPA Section 111 proposed rule in stakeholder meetings and consider mandating a sensitivity scenario in the 2024 IRP update to address the proposed rule if adopted and not stayed, sorry.
Yeah, I understand that. I recommend that it happen sooner.
Understand. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions for this witness, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for this witness? Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning, Ms. Glick.
Good morning.
In your work, do you prepare IRPs? Do you review IRPs?
I review IRPs.
Okay. And how many different locations, would give or take a whole bunch, have you reviewed?
Dozens of states. So I am engaged in litigated dockets sometimes, such as this. I review and write comments sometimes in states where there are not litigated proceedings. I'm involved in stakeholder processes. So it's a range of different levels of involvement in dozens of states.
Okay. And does that perspective give you an awareness as to how often the models that the IRPs are based on are run, how regularly? And I guess I'm really asking, are models run in IRP updates from your exposure, if you know?
Not sure I totally understand. Are you asking me if modeling software is used for an IRP update in the same way it's used for a regular IRP?
Yes.
Yes. So yes, if an IRP plan is conducted using a specific software, then you use the same software to conduct the update. You already have the model set up. You have all the resources. You would make updates to it, but there's no reason that you would not use that same software that you've set up to then conduct the update.
So based on the testimony we've heard so far, would you anticipate that an updated estimate for the natural gas combined cycle plant would be included in the update next year?
I don't know if it would be because I was traveling yesterday, so I didn't hear the
okay.
testimony yesterday, but I was listening on Monday, and I didn't hear that. I don't know that there was any concession that the costs were too low, in fact. So I wouldn't expect to see an update if there's not agreement that the costs are too low by the company.
I didn't mean to suggest that the company suggested that, and I won't try to summarize what I did here, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Commissioners, further questions for this witness? Hearing none. Ms. Jaffe, any redirect?
Yes, just one. I'll just do it from here if that's okay.
That's fine. As long as your witness doesn't mind a voice from behind her.
Ms. Glick, Mr. Cooper asked you if you were aware that ORS recommended that the Section 111 rule as proposed be reviewed in future stakeholder sessions and the 2024 update. Why, in your opinion, should Santee Cooper have looked at that more closely in its rerun of its model when it addressed ORS's prior recommendations?
Yeah, so as I stated in my summary, if this rule is proposed and it's likely to be finalized, modeling sooner means the company is more prepared. It knows its options. It does not lock the company into any specific resource options. It simply makes the company more prepared. The longer the company waits, the less options it has, the harder it will be to comply. If the rule continues to get delayed, but eventually is enacted, if the company waits until it's finalized or waits for another year or two, that's a year or two less that it has to begin exploring what the resource options are to replace it.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jaffe. Ms. Glick, thank you for your appearance today and your testimony. We certainly appreciate your perspective and hearing from you. And with that, you may stand down. Thank you. Are we going to, have y'all decided the order from here? Say CCL, your witness up. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Belser. The South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy call Anna Summer and Chelsea Hoteling to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. Ms. Summer, I'll start with you, if you don't mind making sure that your microphone is on. Thank you. Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Anna Summer.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a principal at Energy Futures Group, or EFG.
Thank you. Did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on September 25th, 2023, direct testimony consisting of 33 pages?
Yes.
And Ms. Summer, certain pages of your direct testimony contained confidential information. Do you recall that a confidential version of that testimony was filed under seal with the Commission?
Yes.
And you also filed a corrected version, or did you also file a corrected version of your direct testimony with the Commission on October 16th, 2023, along with a corrected confidential version of that testimony that was filed under seal?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to the corrected version of your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
So if the questions put to you in your corrected direct testimony were asked of you at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belser, I would move to have Ms. Summers' corrected pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, with the corrected confidential version of that testimony remaining under seal.
Ms. Summers' corrected direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand, and the confidential version will remain confidential and under seal.
Thank you. Ms. Summer, did you also attach to your direct testimony 5 exhibits identified as exhibits AS1 through AS5?
Yes.
And certain pages of exhibit AS3 contain confidential information. Do you recall that a confidential version of that exhibit was filed under seal with the Commission?
Yes.
Were the confidential and non-confidential exhibits to your testimony prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Belser, I would also move to have exhibits AS1 through AS5 as attached to Ms. Summers' pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit, with confidential exhibit AS3 remaining under seal.
Ms. Summers' pre-filed direct and exhibits AS1 through AS5 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 18 and admitted into the evidence of this case, with exhibit AS1, which has been afforded confidential designation, remaining confidential and under seal.
And for the record, Chair Belser, I believe it's AS3.
I'm sorry.
That is confidential.
Like I said, if I could read my notes, it would help. AS3 will remain confidential and under seal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Summer, turning to your rebuttal testimony, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on November 17th, 2023, rebuttal testimony consisting of 20 pages?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall the certain pages of your rebuttal testimony contain confidential test information, and that confidential version was filed under seal with the Commission?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony at this time?
I do. I would like to make the following corrections. On page 2, line 6, delete the, delete the portion of the sentence that starts transmission upgrades and. On page 11, lines 5 through 7, delete the sentence that begins with this amount and ends with the CGT system.
Would you repeat that? on page 11?
Of course. On page 11, lines 5 through 7, that sentence begins with this amount and ends with the CGT system. And then on page 12, strike the Q&A that begins on line 3 and concludes on page 13 at line 3.
And Chair Belser, I'll note that we will be filing corrected versions of testimony with the commission later today.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon.
Ms. Summer,
With that, are those the only corrections?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Aside from those changes, if the questions put to you in your rebuttal testimony were asked of you at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Chair Belser, I would move to have Ms. Summers' pre-filed rebuttal testimony as corrected from the stand entered into the record with the confidential version of that corrected testimony remaining under seal.
Ms. Summers' pre-file rebuttal testimony as corrected from the stand will be entered into the record as if given orally, and it will be afforded confidential designation and remain under seal, those portions.
Ms. Summer, I will ask you a series of questions to provide the commission and parties with a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony, starting with your expert qualifications. Would you please describe your professional background and qualifications?
Of course. First of all, I'd like to thank the commission, Chair Belser, commissioners, for the opportunity to appear before you again today. I began my career in 2003 at Synapse Energy Economics, where I focused on integrated resource planning and energy efficiency, among other topics. I later served as a project manager at Energy Solutions before founding my own consultancy in 2010. There I focused on all aspects of integrated resource planning, including how energy efficiency is screened and incorporated in IRP modeling. I ultimately transitioned to Energy Futures Group in 2019, where I have continued my focus on IRPs. In total, I have worked for 20 years in electric utility regulation and related fields. I've provided expert testimony on resource planning and certificate of need applications before utility commissions in South Carolina, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, North Carolina, Puerto Rico, South Dakota, and West Virginia. Before this commission specifically, I provided expert witness testimony on behalf of the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and the Dominion Energy South Carolina 2020 IRP proceeding. That's docket number 2019-226-E. And I also testified in docket number 2021-93-E regarding Dominion's plan to replace certain combustion turbine units at its Urquhart site. I hold a Bachelor's of Science in Economics and Environmental Studies from Tufts University and a Master's in Science and Energy Resources from University of California, Berkeley. I've also taken coursework in data analytics at Clarkson University and in civil engineering and applied mechanics at McGill University. My resume is attached to my direct testimony as Exhibit AS1 and contains further details about my educational and professional background.
Thank you. And do you have experience reviewing the models that electric utilities use to determine the optimal resource mix and ensure resource adequacy in IRP and other utility proceedings?
Yes, ma'am. I have reviewed planning modeling based on multiple models, including Aurora, Capacity Expansion Model, Encompass, Plexus, PowerSim, ProSim, ProMod, ServM, and System Optimizer, and have had formal training on the Aurora, Encompass, PowerSim, and Strategist models.
And have you reviewed utilities' capacity expansion, production cost, and reliability modeling in IRP and other proceedings?
Yes, I have reviewed over 100 IRPs and related planning exercises in jurisdictions all over the country, including South Carolina and in Canada. I have also been involved in several gas plant certificate of need proceedings.
Thank you. Chair Belser, at this time, I would request that Ms. Summer be qualified as an expert in utility integrated resource planning, capacity expansion, production cost, and reliability modeling. And I can repeat that.
Thank you.
That'll be
Please
helpful.
do.
So utility integrated resource planning, capacity expansion, production cost, and reliability modeling.
Any voir dire or questioning on the witness's qualifications as an expert in utility IRP planning, capacity expansion, production cost, and reliability modeling? Hearing none, we'll accept this witness as an expert in utility IRP planning, capacity expansion, production cost, and reliability modeling.
Thank you. Turning to your testimony, Ms. Summer, would you please describe the purpose of your direct testimony?
The purpose of my direct testimony was to highlight the risks associated with the major resource addition across nearly all of Santee Cooper's portfolios, a large gas-fired combined cycle unit. This resource presents numerous major risks, namely capital cost risk for both the plant itself as well as the pipeline that would serve it, execution risk related to constructing the pipeline, and potential future regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. In my direct testimony, I evaluated Santee Cooper's combined cycle, combustion turbine, and pipeline capital costs. I examined the impacts of EPA's proposed Clean Air Act 111 greenhouse gas rule on Santee Cooper's resource plan, given its reliance on the proposed CC gas plant. And I addressed the market potential study prepared by Resource Innovations.
Thank you. And what were your primary observations?
First, the capital costs of the combined cycle and combustion turbines included in the IRP are too low and not likely to be reflective of the increases in cost due to supply chain and other cost pressures. At a minimum, Santee Cooper's cost estimate should be increased by 18%. Second, the EPA's proposed greenhouse gas rule represents a material economic risk to any new fossil fuel-fired power plant and should be thoroughly evaluated before seeking approval to build new fossil fuel-fired generators. Third, the market potential study understates the avoided costs associated with energy efficiency and was not developed in a manner that would maximize cost-effective energy efficiency.
Thank you. And did Santee Cooper respond to your testimony in rebuttal?
Yes, my testimony was addressed by Santee Cooper witnesses Dembla, Kushner, Herndon, and Altman. I responded to the most significant of these responses in my rebuttal testimony.
And would you please explain the purpose of your rebuttal testimony?
The purpose of my rebuttal testimony was to address, first, witness Kushner's testimony as it relates to the projected cost of the proposed CC, witness Herndon's testimony regarding my critiques of the market potential study, and witness Altman's testimony regarding the scope of Act 90.
Okay. And how did you respond to witness Kushner's testimony concerning the projected cost of the proposed combined cycle plant?
Witness Kushner's understanding of the capital cost estimates supports my view that an increase of 18% in Santee Cooper's assumed cost is justified. In fact, an 18% increase in the utility's capital cost estimates for new CCs is the minimum increase that should be made, as there are significant additional costs related to pipeline costs.
And how did you respond to witness Herndon's testimony regarding your critiques of the market potential study?
Witness Herndon's contention concerning the market potential study cannot be verified or evaluated because Santee Cooper and Resource Innovations claim that key files used to conduct the MPS are proprietary, rendering them unreviewable by interveners. This raises significant concerns about the transparency of these models and their use by utilities in commission proceedings. I also noted that witness Herndon's testimony does not address the merits of including avoided distribution costs and adjusting energy savings by marginal losses.
Thank you. And how did you respond to witness Altman's testimony regarding the scope of Act 90?
Witness Altman claims that Santee Cooper's DSM programs are not within the scope of Act 90 because they are for residential and commercial customers, not for the combined system. But witness Altman is incorrect. There's ample language in Act 90 establishing the Commission's authority to require fulsome evaluation of DSM in this case, as I explained in my rebuttal testimony. I would further note that DSM has a central and crucial role to play here, particularly in an environment of increasing demand, as witness Dembla described in his testimony. Energy efficiency is among the most modular, quickest to scale, least risky, and most likely to enhance affordability of all the resources available to Santee Cooper. Given that the utility already expects to be short on capacity and anticipates further load growth, nothing less than a robust effort to advance energy efficiency in Santee Cooper's footprint is needed.
And based on the analysis you presented in your direct and rebuttal testimony, what are your recommendations to the Commission?
First, I recommend the Commission require Santee Cooper to use the thermal capital cost adders presented in witness Hotailing's direct testimony. Second, the Commission should require Santee Cooper to evaluate the cost of each portfolio and to determine the economically optimal portfolio for compliance under each major compliance pathway of the EPA 111 rule prior to any approval of a new fossil fuel-fired resource. Third, for the market potential study prepared for the next IRP, I recommend that the Commission direct Santee Cooper to include avoided transmission and distribution costs, use marginal line losses, mix and match incentive levels to maximize cost-effective savings, include the potential for emerging technologies, and provide its potential study model files to interveners. Fourth, the Commission should require Santee Cooper to include in its next IRP an assessment of the reliability impacts of differing levels of energy efficiency. And fifth, the Commission should require that Santee Cooper include in its next IRP an evaluation of the opportunities to expand its energy efficiency and demand-side management potential through differing program design, such as midstream incentives and/or enhanced coordination with its cooperative and municipal customers.
Thank you, Ms. Sommer. Turning to Ms. Hotailing, could you please state your name for the record?
My name is Chelsea Hotailing.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a consultant at Energy Futures Group, or EFG.
Thank you. And Ms. Hotailing, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on September 22nd, 2023? Direct testimony consisting of 53 pages.
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony at this time?
No.
If the questions put to you in your testimony were asked of you at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I would move to have Ms. Hotailing's pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Hotailing's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Ms. Hotailing, did you also attach to your direct testimony 5 exhibits identified as exhibits CH1 through CH5?
Yes.
And were those exhibits prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Belzer, I would move to have exhibits CH1 through CH5 as attached to Ms. Hotailing's pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Ms. Hotailing's pre-filed direct exhibits CH1 to CH5 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 19 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Ms. Hotailing, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on November 17th, 2023, rebuttal testimony consisting of 25 pages?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony at this time?
Yes, I would like to make the following corrections. On page 2, line 5, delete transmission costs.
And we'll be sure to walk through these slowly, so please let us know if we're going too quickly. Please go on.
On page 2, line 20, delete additional transmission. On page 21, lines 13 to 14, delete she also determined an updated range for transmission upgrade cost at the Kennedy site. Strike from page 22, line 14, to page 23, line 1. On page 23, delete table 8. On page 23, line 20, delete and transmission. On page 24, line 2, replace 6% with 5.7%. And on page 24, table 9, delete the 2 rightmost columns titled firm gas and transmission.
Thank you. you. And again, there will be a corrected version that we will file with the commission today. Aside from those changes, if the questions put to you in your testimony were asked of you at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I would move to have Ms. Hotailing's pre-filed rebuttal testimony as corrected today from the stand entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Ms. Hotailing's pre-filed rebuttal testimony as corrected from the stand will be admitted into the record as if testified to from the stand.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Tailing, I'll ask you a few questions to provide the summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony. Would you please describe your professional background and qualifications?
Yes, I have more than 7 years of experience in the field of electric utility regulation and related fields. In my current role at Energy Futures Group, I help to deliver clean energy consulting projects on behalf of regulators, government agencies, utilities, and advocacy organizations. Our team regularly provides expert witness testimony on integrated resource planning and related policy issues and regulatory proceedings in 20 U.S. states and 5 Canadian provinces. Personally, I have reviewed dozens of IRPs and related filings by utilities in South Carolina, Arizona, Colorado, Kansas, Kentucky, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, Minnesota, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Puerto Rico, as well as Nova Scotia. I recently filed rebuttal testimony and appeared before the Commission and Dominion Energy South Carolina's 2023 IRP proceeding, which was docket number 2023-9-E, on behalf of CCL, SACE, and Sierra Club. Additionally, I have filed testimony before the Kentucky Public Service Commission, the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, the Michigan Public Service Commission, and the Iowa Utilities Board. As I stated in my direct testimony, I have 3 master's degrees in environmental policy, data analytics, and business administration, as well as a bachelor's degree in accounting and economics. Additionally, my resume, which is attached to my direct testimony as Exhibit CH-1, includes more details about my professional and educational background.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Tailing, do you have experience running the models that electric utilities use to determine the optimal resource mix and ensure resource adequacy in IRP and other utility proceedings?
Yes, I perform my own capacity expansion, production cost, and reliability modeling in numerous cases using multiple models, including Encompass, Aurora, Plexus, and the Strategic Energy and Risk Evaluation Model, otherwise known as SERVM.
Thank you. Chair Belzer, at this time, I would request that Ms. Hotaling be qualified as an expert in capacity expansion and production cost modeling, including Encompass and SERVM modeling.
Questions for the witness regarding her qualifications as an expert in the field of capacity and expansion modeling, including Encompass and SERVM models? Hearing none, the Commission will accept Ms. Hotaling as an expert in capacity and expansion modeling.
Capacity expansion and production modeling.
An expert in capacity and expansion and, I don't know why I'm having trouble with this, production cost modeling, including Encompass and SERVM. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hotaling, would you please explain the purpose of your direct testimony?
The purpose of my direct testimony was to examine Santee Cooper's 2023 IRP and determine whether its preferred portfolio or its preferred adjusted portfolio qualified as the most reasonable and prudent means of meeting the utility's energy and capacity needs.
Ms. Hotaling, I apologize for interrupting. Could you slow down just a little bit?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Do you need her to repeat anything? Okay, thank you. And what did you conclude?
I concluded that neither of Santee Cooper's preferred portfolios is the most reasonable and prudent path, primarily due to the utility's reliance on the addition of a large, risky combined cycle, or CC, gas plant.
And what are some of the problems that you identified with Santee Cooper's preferred path?
Pursuing a plan that depends on a large, risky CC gas plant presents a number of major implementation and cost risks, including capital cost risk for both the plant itself as well as the pipeline that would serve it, execution risk related to constructing the pipeline, and future regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. A large CC addition unnecessarily exposes customers to fuel cost volatility for decades to come.
Thank you. And were there problems with Santee Cooper's modeling approach that may have led to the utility's suboptimal preferred plan?
Yes, Santee Cooper failed to sufficiently evaluate or incorporate key data in its modeling, which otherwise could have led to a less risky preferred portfolio that does not rely on a new large CC gas plant. For example, Santee Cooper failed to include the essential PPAs in all of the portfolios that it modeled. It did not account for the capacity that the Cherokee CC would provide past 2028. It did not allow for the flexible operations of battery storage resources, and it should have evaluated higher levels of the energy community bonus adder available under the Inflation Reduction Act for battery storage projects. The alternative portfolios that I modeled demonstrate the importance of requiring Santee Cooper to revise its modeling and assumptions accordingly.
Thank you. Would you please tell us about your alternative portfolios?
Yes. In contrast to Santee Cooper's preferred plan, the alternative portfolios I developed demonstrate the feasibility of a lower risk, cost-effective plan that avoids reliance on a highly uncertain CC addition. Like Santee Cooper, I use the Encompass model to perform my own capacity expansion and production cost modeling to develop alternative portfolios. While Santee Cooper's preferred portfolio delays the retirement of the Wynya coal plant to 2031 and adds a new CC gas plant to replace it, my alternative, the CCL SACE Servum verified portfolio, retires Wynya at the end of 2028 and replaces the coal plant with a combination of solar and 4-hour battery storage resources. Unlike Santee Cooper, after developing my alternative portfolio, I used the Servum model to test the reliability of that portfolio. And as explained in my direct testimony, I found that the CCL SACE Servum verified portfolio meets the industry standard reliability metric. Overall, my modeling shows that a portfolio with solar and battery storage resources to replace the Wynya coal plant is not just more feasible and lower risk than a portfolio with a large new CC gas plant, but also a reliable solution for Santee Cooper's customers.
Thank you. Ms. O'Tailing, would you please explain the purpose of your surrebuttal testimony?
The purpose of my surrebuttal testimony was respond to Santee Cooper Witness Davis rebuttal regarding my Encompass and Servum modeling and alternative portfolio. Specifically, I respond to Witness Davis's assertions that a resource portfolio with a large CC gas plant is the lowest cost and lowest risk portfolio, and that the CCL SACE Servum verified portfolio is actually costlier than presented because of errors and disputed assumptions in my modeling.
Do you believe that Witness Davis's assertions are correct?
No, the CCL SACE Servum verified portfolio is comparable in cost to the Santee Cooper preferred adjusted portfolio. I use the same approach as Santee Cooper to develop the net present value of the PVRR for the preferred adjusted revised portfolio and the CCL SACE Servum verified portfolio. And the results show that the portfolios are comparable on a cost basis, differing by about 1%. Notably, in contrast to Santee Cooper's preferred path, my alternative portfolio poses significantly lower fuel volatility risk to customers and proves there's an alternative approach that maintains system reliability without requiring costly or risky new generation to fulfill near-term needs and enable coal retirement. Furthermore, Santee Cooper's preferred path may be even costlier than expected. In the second portion of my surrebuttal testimony, I provided updated Encompass modeling results that incorporated gas transportation bid data for the proposed CC and Santee Cooper's preferred adjusted portfolio. My supplemental modeling shows that Santee Cooper's preferred path has a potential to cost up to 5.7% or more than $1 billion more than the CCL Safe Servum verified portfolio when more realistic costs associated with the CC are taken into account.
Okay. Based on the analysis you presented in your direct and sir rebuttal testimony, what are your recommendations for the commission?
Overall, I recommend that the commission reject Santee Cooper's 2023 IRP and adopt as the most reasonable and prudent plan a portfolio that does not include the proposed shared CC gas plant due to the high potential costs and risks associated with that resource, retires the Wynyard coal plant by 2029, and builds out solar and storage resources through 2029 to reliably meet any expected capacity shortfall. With respect to the 2023 IRP, I recommend that the commission require the utility to revise its modeling and assumptions by including the central PPAs in all portfolios modeled, including the cost adders for the gas-fired CC, adopting an ELCC curve for 8-hour battery resources in line with results from the Duke Energy Progress ELCC study, include the Cherokee CC capacity past 2028, evaluate higher levels of the Energy Community Bonus Adder available under the Inflation Reduction Act for battery storage projects, and allow for the flexible operations of battery storage resources. I have not seen another utility use Santee Cooper's approach in the way that they modeled battery resources. In future IRPs and IRP updates, Santee Cooper should revise its modeling and assumptions as described in my testimony, including high levels of penetration of solar, wind, and battery storage resources, factoring in tax gross-ups for the production tax credit and investment tax credit applied to renewable and battery storage resources, and include scenarios to evaluate the proposed Clean Air Act, Rule 111, Greenhouse Gas Rule, among other important revisions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Tailing. Chair Belser, witnesses Summer and O'Tailing are now available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Sierra Club?
No questions.
Sasiba?
Excuse me, no questions, thank you.
Central Electric?
No questions.
Santee Cooper Industrial Customer Group?
No questions, Madam Chair, thank you.
Google?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Ziegler? Do you have a lot? Okay, I'm just looking at the lunch break, so thank you.
For the clarity of the record, I would like to ask you, Ms. Summer, a couple of questions, or maybe just only one, just to state what the subject matter of the text that was deleted from your pre-file testimony was. And am I correct that that text related to the basis for your assertion in that pre-file testimony that Santee Cooper had understated the electric transmission cost associated with its preferred portfolio supplemental and certain conclusions based on that assertion? Is that a correct, reasonably accurate summary of what was deleted?
I recommended a modification to the transmission costs associated with the addition of the joint CC at Kennedy's, and after reviewing Santee Cooper's transmission impact assessment study, as well as the testimony of Mr. Painter, concluded that Mr. Wagner's testimony and the manner in which those costs had been modeled was not representative of the transmission costs. In Mr. Wagner's direct testimony, he characterized the $443 million in transmission upgrades as associated with the retirement of Wynyard, and those were represented as such in the Compass modeling also. And that therefore I recommended additional costs associated with Kennedy specifically. We subsequently learned after the filing of Mr. Wagner's testimony and the filing of our testimony that those transmission costs actually represent a combination of retirement of the Wynyard units as well as the addition of the Kennedy's site. And Instead, what we should have done is apply an approximately $150 million reduction in the present value revenue requirement to our no fossil portfolio.
Thank you, Ms. Summer. That's my only question.
Okay.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions for this panel, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for this panel? Do you want to come back after lunch? Ladies.
Madam Chair, I only have one question.
Okay. Commissioner Caston?
And I think it's for Ms. Totaling. In your, I think, direct testimony on page 21, where you talk about modeling partial BESS, selection of that. I was kind of curious, can that be purchased in partial packages? Can BESS be, can you do that? I mean, I don't really know.
Yeah, battery storage resources are very modular. You can oftentimes maybe not see a project with a perfectly round 250 or 100. It might be 409, might be 415. So it's really about, issuing that all source request for proposals and seeing what bids come in. But I wouldn't say that they're strictly adhered to kind of a perfect round number.
Okay, so it would be in blocks of some sort. What?
Yes,
is there like
could
a
be.
minimum block or?
It would just depend on each, whatever's been specified for that particular project. But I think that, we've seen a wide range of sizes in response to RFPs.
All right, thank you. I have no more questions.
Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belser. Good afternoon. I think it was Ms. Summer who testified, but I could be confused at this point, regarding Cherokee and Ms. Hotel, and that it be extended beyond 2028. Would you tell me more about that? Remind me more about that?
Yeah, so my understanding of the modeling is that Santee Cooper had allowed in the near term the model to see some short-term capacity purchases, and my understanding was that the Cherokee CC was kind of somewhat implicit in that representation of something that could be purchased in the short term for capacity. But now my understanding through the other proceeding is that Santee Cooper is going to move forward, with having that resource on its system post 2028. So it wouldn't just be a short-term agreement that they enter into every year, that it would be on their system after that time.
Thank you. Help me to understand some prior testimony we had about battery modeling and allowing it to be evaluated using it more than one time a day, and how that relates to your testimony?
Yes, so Santee, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm interrupting you.
No, go ahead, please.
Compatible, is it different? Is it, if you can relate those two for my understanding, that would be really helpful.
Yes, just to make sure I'm understanding your question, you'd like to understand the difference between what I modeled and what Santee Cooper modeled?
Well, and yes, but I believe that part of what was represented by a prior witness, I'm going to think it was Sierra Club, but it's kind of, was that the modeling that Santee Cooper included had a fixed, only one use, whether it was 1 minute or 1 hour or however many megawatts. So I'm asking how your testimony relates to that prior testimony that we've heard from an intervener.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I want to make sure I can answer you in the best way possible. So Santee Cooper's approach to modeling battery storage resources was that they use an input and encompass called max starts per day, and that was set to 1. So that means that the battery can only discharge 1 time per day, which would mean that depending on how it gets dispatched in the model, if it only dispatches for 1 hour, but maybe there would be an opportunity later in the day for that evening, later afternoon, evening peak. It already dispatched for 1 hour in the morning. The model could not see it as being something that would be available later in the day. Instead of using that approach, I used what's called an annual capacity factor limit input in Encompass, which would, I use specifically 16.67%, which is an approximation of 4 hours divided by 24 hours, how often the battery could discharge in a day. So this gives it more flexibility in the model so that it might, if the model wants to dispatch it for a couple hours in the morning, it would be able to, and then also see that it would have the opportunity to be either recharged or still have energy left in the system to be used, you know, for example, in the afternoon. So it just allows a better approximation of how you would see battery storage resources operate on a system, because they're very flexible. And so that is why I changed that input for our modeling.
So it's consistent with prior intervener recommendation is what I'm hearing.
Consistent with Witness Glicks or my own experience in other?
I think with Witness Glicks.
Okay. I think we might need to caveat that I think the question that had been asked was about cycling and not particular to just one max start per day. So cycle, my understanding of cycle is that it would fully charge or fully discharge the full 4 hours, and that would be your cycle. So I think there's a little bit of a distinction just to add on to the exchange that happened earlier.
Will you try it one more time and say what max start is versus cycling?
Yeah,
because
so
I'm totally, I mean, I'm getting there, but.
I'm sorry that I'm not.
No, it's all new.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So hopefully this will help. So with the max start per day, that means that the model can only discharge it one time per day. So if the model decides to say, we would like to discharge this battery resource at 9 a.m. in the morning, but we only need it maybe for 9 a.m. in the morning, that means that it then is unavailable for the rest of the day because of how the logic is set up in the model.
Right.
Whereas with an annual capacity factor limit, it's approximating that cycle and spreading it out over the year, because you kind of typically see most battery storage resources that get submitted in like an RFP, they'll kind of say the standard is maybe 365 cycles per year. And so that capacity factor limit is trying to approximate that. So it gives it more flexibility for the resource to be available in the morning and potentially later in the day, depending on what's happening on the system.
Okay. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I thought that Ms. Hoteling's explanation was excellent, but I thought it might be helpful to clarify that I think the misunderstanding on the part of Witness Davis has to do with a typical specification for batteries from the manufacturer, which is that they can not engage in more than 365 cycles per day. And he's confusing cycles with starts. A cycle means a full charge and discharge of the battery. A start means that you turn it on, you might turn it off right away. So he's saying that they are allowing the battery to turn on, and even if it dispatches, for 5 minutes, let's say, and turns off, it has completed its cycle. But that's not the true definition of a cycle. A cycle is a full charge and discharge. And so the way that you develop the capacity factor limit that Ms. Hoteling used in her modeling is you multiply that number of cycles by the 4 hours, and you get that's approximately 17% capacity factor. So it allows for a more flexible and true operation of the battery.
May I ask for clarification?
Yes.
Ms. Summer, you testified 365 cycles per day.
Oh, I'm sorry, per year.
Okay,
Apologies.
thank you.
Yeah, per year. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Early in, I think Ms. Hoteling's testimony, there was reference to ensuring that you met national standards for reliability. Would you talk more about what that means? And
Yes, so that is the loss of load expectation reliability metric. That's 1 day in 10 years or 0.1 day per year. So that's the standard that we're evaluating. And so what I did was after I did my initial run and Encompass, I put that initial expansion plan into the SERVM model, which SERVM can be used to evaluate the reliability of portfolios. And so I use that process to try to answer that question. If we put this portfolio through SERVM, what is that LOLE metric? And that's when I found that it was slightly over 0.1 days per year, and went back to Encompass to say, what other resources can we add to kind of tweak our portfolio? And then added a few resources, solar and battery storage resources, and then put it back into SERVM to test to see if it met that reliability metric.
And the reliability metric, is that a federal standard?
NERC.
Yep. Okay, got it. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you.
Commissioners, questions for this panel? Hearing none. Ms. Mixon, any redirect?
No redirect.
Thank you. Ladies, thank you for your appearance here today and your testimony. We certainly appreciate your participation and input in this proceeding, and you may stand down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Mixon, anything further?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. It's about 12:30. Why don't we break for lunch and return at 2 p.m.? I'll give you about an hour and a half. Thank you.